The ballroom was an ocean of light. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped diamonds of light onto a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet ambition, hummed with the conversations of the city's elite. At the center of it all, on a raised dais, stood Adana. She wore a gown the color of molten gold, a creation of her own design that flowed around her like liquid sunlight. It was simple in its cut, but breathtaking in its effect, a testament to the artist's hand that had made it. Her hair was styled in an elegant crown of braids, and on her neck rested a single, perfect diamond that seemed to have captured all the light in the room. She was speaking, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone but losing none of its warmth. She was telling a story about hunger, a story about a plate of rice. Across the room, a woman in a cheap, ill-fitting server's uniform froze, a tray of champagne flutes trembling in her hand. Her name was Brenda, and her face, once a mask of smug superiority, was now a canvas of disbelief and sickening recognition. The smile she wore for the guests was 40% practiced and 60% pure, unadulterated horror. She knew that woman. She remembered her. Not like this, not a queen bathed in gold and adoration. She remembered her in a drab gray cleaner's uniform, with worn-out shoes and eyes that held the quiet resilience of someone who had seen too much of the world's sharp edges. She remembered firing her. She remembered the exact words she had used, words that had been designed to cut, to diminish, to erase. People like you don't belong in places like this. And now, here Adana was, in the grandest place of all, and it was Brenda who was invisible, scurrying around the edges, serving drinks, and trying not to be noticed. A man stepped up beside Adana on the stage. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Brenda's car, but he moved with an unnerving stillness. His name was Kaelo Adebayo, and his net worth was a number with too many commas for most people to comprehend. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His presence was a gravitational force that pulled the entire room into silence. He gently took the microphone from Adana, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd leaned in. Phones, which had been discreetly filming, were now held up openly, a forest of tiny glass eyes capturing the moment. Adana is too humble to tell you the whole story. Kaelo's voice was a low, resonant hum. She told you she founded the Chike Foundation to feed the hungry. She didn't tell you that the first person she fed was me. A gasp rippled through the audience. It was a sound like wind through dry leaves. Kaelo's gaze swept the room, cold and assessing, before landing with pinpoint accuracy on Brenda. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that moment, Brenda felt seen in a way that stripped her bare. He didn't know her name. He didn't have to. He saw her type. He saw the petty cruelty, the cheap satisfaction of punching down. I was dressed in rags, Kaelo continued, his voice dropping lower. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I had nothing. And she, a woman who had just lost her job, a woman who had only enough money for one last meal for herself and her young son, she gave it all to me. She walked away with nothing so that a stranger could eat. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was no longer a polite, attentive silence. It was a heavy, sacred silence. Brenda felt the tray begin to slip from her numb fingers. Tonight, we have raised $15 million to ensure no one in this city goes hungry, Kaelo said, his voice ringing with quiet power. But all of this, all these chandeliers, all this wealth, all of us, it was all born from a single plate of jollof rice and fried plantain. It was born from one woman who understood that your true worth is not what you have, it's what you're willing to give away. He turned back to Adana, and the coldness in his eyes melted into a look of such profound love and reverence that people in the front row felt their throats tighten. He didn't say another word. He simply reached out and took her hand. The room exploded into a standing ovation, a tidal wave of applause that felt like a judgment. Brenda didn't hear it. All she heard was the deafening crash as the tray of a dozen crystal champagne flutes hit the marble floor, shattering around her feet like her own broken reflection. If you love stories where a single act of kindness can change a universe, where the pure of heart are lifted higher than they ever dreamed, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. Because the reward for a plate of rice and beans in this story is going to change your definition of generosity forever. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 6 months and a lifetime earlier, Adana was invisible. She was 32 years old, a widow from a small village in Nigeria, now adrift in the concrete canyons of a sprawling American city. Her husband, David, had been the light of her life, a man with a laugh that could fill a room and dreams as big as the sky they now both lived under, albeit on different sides of existence. He had died in a construction accident 2 years prior, a tragedy that had been swift, senseless, and absolute. It had left a hole in her heart, and a 7-year-old boy named Chike, who had his father's eyes and his mother's quiet strength. Chike was her world, her sun, her moon, her entire starry sky. For him, she would bear any burden, endure any humiliation. And she did. Her life was a grueling rhythm of work, a constant battle against the tide of bills that threatened to pull her and Chike under. By day, from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., she was a cleaner for a commercial janitorial service. She scrubbed toilets and polished floors in high-end corporate offices, moving like a ghost through spaces where people made in an hour what she made in a week. Her second job started the moment she got home. Adana was a seamstress, a magician with a needle and thread. It was a gift passed down from her grandmother, a skill that was in her blood. She could take discarded scraps of fabric and spin them into beautiful clothes for Chike. She did alterations for people in her neighborhood, her old Singer machine humming late into the night in their cramped, one-bedroom apartment. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up, the air thick with the smell of other people's cooking and the faint, persistent scent of damp. The rent was $1,250 a month, a monstrous sum that consumed nearly everything she earned. This month was harder than most. Chike had needed new shoes, a winter coat, and medicine for a nasty cough. The numbers on the crumpled bank receipt in her pocket were stark and unforgiving. Checking account balance, $87.54. Rent due in 2 days. A cold knot of dread was a permanent resident in her stomach. She had a few alteration jobs to finish, which would bring in another $60, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She was running out of thread, both literally and metaphorically. The one constant source of cruelty in her life was her supervisor at the cleaning company, Brenda. Brenda was a woman who seemed to have been born with a sneer permanently affixed to her face. She was meticulously dressed in cheap but flashy clothes, her nails always perfectly manicured, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet. She managed the cleaning crew with a kind of petty tyranny, finding fault in everything and everyone. But she reserved a special kind of venom for Adana. She mocked Adana's accent, rolling her eyes when she spoke. She would run a gloved finger over a surface Adana had just cleaned and declare it filthy. She seemed to take a personal, vicious pleasure in reminding Adana of her station. That Tuesday, the dread in Adana's stomach turned into a cold, hard stone. She was cleaning the executive washroom on the 45th floor of the Adebayo Tower, a gleaming monument of glass and steel. It was her last task of the day. As she was wiping down the marble countertops, Brenda stormed in, her face flushed with theatrical rage. She was holding a small, empty perfume bottle. "This was on Mr. Henderson's desk," she hissed, shaking the bottle in Adana's face. "My brand, my expensive brand. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Adana stared at her, confused. I do not understand. I did not touch anything on any desk." Brenda let out a short, ugly laugh. "Oh, please. I know your type. You see something shiny and you just can't help yourselves. You probably thought you could sell it." "I am not a thief," Adana said, her voice quiet but firm. The accusation was so absurd, so baseless, it felt like a scene from a bad play. But Brenda was not playing. "I've had it with you," Brenda snapped, her eyes glinting with malice. "Your attitude, your excuses. You're a liability. We have standards here. This is a place for professionals, not people like you. You're fired. Get your things and get out. People like you don't belong in places like this." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Fired. The word echoed in the pristine, silent washroom. No job, no final paycheck. Rent due, $87.54. Chike. Adana felt the floor drop out from under her. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. What was the point? Arguing with a person like Brenda was like trying to reason with a storm. You just had to endure it. She slowly, methodically, put her cleaning supplies back on the cart. She took off her gray smock, folded it neatly, and placed it on the cart as well. She looked at Brenda one last time, her eyes holding not anger, but a deep, profound weariness. Then she turned and walked away, the sound of her worn-out shoes echoing on the polished marble floor. That night, she called her mother in Nigeria. The connection was poor, a faint, crackling line that stretched across an ocean. "Mama," Adana whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She told her everything. The job, the accusation, the rent. Her mother listened in silence, her presence a warm, steady weight on the other end of the line. When Adana finished, her mother didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. She offered wisdom, as she always did. "Adana, my child," she said, her voice a familiar balm. "Do you remember the proverb I taught you when you were a little girl, when you gave your only fish to the old woman by the river?" Adana closed her eyes, picturing her mother's face, the deep lines of kindness etched around her eyes. "Yes, Mama. Tell it to me." Adana took a shaky breath. "The hand that gives," she recited, the words a prayer on her tongue, "is the hand that gathers." "That is the truth of our family," her mother said. "It is the truth of the world, even when the world tries to make you forget it. Do not let this woman's bitterness poison your spirit. Your heart is your wealth, Adana. Do not let anyone steal it from you." They spoke for a few more minutes, the conversation turning to Chike, the weather, the cost of yams in the local market. When she hung up, the apartment felt a little less cold. The knot in her stomach had not disappeared, but it had loosened, just a fraction. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. The words were an anchor in the storm. But as she looked at the single, wilting onion on her counter, and the near-empty bag of rice, she wondered what on earth she had left to give. The walk home from the Adebayo Tower was a blur of hazy streetlights and indifferent crowds. Adana moved through the city like a sleepwalker, the shock of her firing wrapped around her like a shroud. The weight of it was physical, pressing down on her shoulders, making each step an effort. She felt hollowed out, scoured clean by Brenda's casual cruelty. All she could think about was Chike's face. How could she walk through the door and tell him there would be no money for rent, that their already precarious world was about to crumble? How could she explain a cruelty she herself couldn't comprehend? On her way, she passed a small, family-run West African takeaway, the windows fogged with steam. The smell of jollof rice, rich with tomato and spice, and the sweet, comforting aroma of fried plantain wafted out, pulling at her. She stopped. She checked her pocket, her fingers finding the crumpled bills. She had just enough. She could buy one large platter. It would be their dinner for tonight. Tomorrow was a problem she couldn't solve yet. But tonight, she could give her son a hot, delicious meal. A small moment of normalcy, of comfort, in the face of the encroaching chaos. She bought the food, the warm styrofoam container, a small, solid comfort in her hands. Instead of heading straight home, she found her feet carrying her to a small, quiet park a few blocks from her apartment. She needed a moment. Just a moment to breathe, to push the fear down, to compose a brave face for her son. She sat on a cold, hard bench under the weak glow of a lamppost. The park was mostly empty, save for a few dog walkers and the distant rumble of traffic. She opened the container, and the fragrant steam rose to her face. It smelled like home. It smelled like a memory of a life before everything became a struggle. She picked up the plastic fork, but she couldn't eat. Her throat was too tight. A few benches away, half shrouded in the shadows, sat a man. He was utterly still. He wasn't begging. He wasn't sleeping. He was just sitting, hunched over, staring at the ground between his feet, as if it held the answers to some terrible question. His clothes were ragged and stained, his hair matted, and a thick, untrimmed beard obscured most of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her. When he briefly looked up, his gaze sweeping vacantly across the park, she saw a depth of despair that startled her. It wasn't just hunger or cold. It was a kind of soul-deep exhaustion, a look of someone who had given up completely. His eyes flickered for a second toward the container in her lap. It wasn't a covetous look, not a demand. It was just a glance, but in it, Adana saw a raw, animal hunger that made her own stomach ache in sympathy. She saw a man who was someone's son, someone's brother, maybe someone's father. She saw a human being at the very edge of his endurance. In that moment, Brenda's face flashed in her mind, the sneer, the contempt. People like you. Then she heard her mother's voice, a clear, calm bell in the chaos of her thoughts. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. She had $87.54 to her name. She had just been fired. She was holding what was likely the last proper meal she and her son would eat for days. And yet, she stood up. She walked over to the man's bench, her steps quiet and deliberate on the pavement. He didn't look up until she was standing right in front of him. He flinched slightly, as if expecting a blow or a harsh word telling him to move along. "Excuse me," Adana said softly. He looked up at her, his eyes wary, defensive. "I bought too much food," she lied, her voice steady. "My son, he has already eaten at a friend's house. I cannot finish this all myself. Please, would you take it?" She held out the warm container. The man stared at it, then at her face, his expression a mixture of confusion and deep, ingrained suspicion. "I don't want your money," he mumbled, his voice raspy from disuse. "It is not money," she said gently. "It is food, jollof rice. It is still hot." He shook his head, looking away. "No, I'm fine." Adana's heart ached for him. She saw his pride, a flickering ember in the ashes of his despair. She knew she couldn't push too hard. She sat down on the bench next to him, leaving a respectful distance between them. She opened the container again, the scent of the food filling the small space between them. She took the fork, separated a small portion of the rice, and then took one of the 6 pieces of golden fried plantain and placed it on a napkin. She closed the container and gently pushed it across the bench toward him. "Please," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. "No one should be hungry." She stood up, holding the single piece of plantain on the napkin. It was for Chike. He would have his favorite treat at least. She gave the man a small, sad smile, and then she turned and walked away without looking back. She didn't see him slowly reach for the container. She didn't see him lift the lid and stare down at the steaming, vibrant red rice as if it were a treasure beyond measure. And she didn't see the first tear trace a clean path through the grime on his cheek, followed by another, and then another, until his shoulders began to shake in silent, ragged sobs under the dim, lonely light of the park lamp. Kaelo Adebayo sat on that bench for a long time, the warmth of the container seeping into his cold hands. He didn't eat. Not yet. He just held it, this unexpected, impossible gift. For the past month, he had been living on the streets, a ghost in his own city. It was a self-imposed exile, a desperate search for something he wasn't even sure existed anymore. His driver and head of security, Jide, thought he was insane. "Boss, this is not a good idea," Jide had warned him, his face a mask of professional concern. "There are better ways to find perspective." But Kaelo had insisted. He was worth $5.3 billion. He had estates on 3 continents, a fleet of cars, a private jet. He had everything a man could want, except the one thing that mattered: trust. His last relationship had ended in a brutal, public implosion. A woman he thought he loved, a woman he had been about to propose to, had been exposed. She hadn't loved him. She had loved the Adebayo name, the access, the lifestyle. She had been systematically defrauding his charities, funneling money into her own offshore accounts. The betrayal had gutted him. It wasn't the money. The money was meaningless, an infinite resource. It was the deception, the realization that the affection, the intimacy, the connection he thought was real, had all been a performance. His father, before he died, had told him, "Kaelo, money can build a wall so high you can't see the real world over it. Be careful it doesn't become your prison." He was living in that prison now. So he had shed his identity. He had traded his suits for rags, his penthouse for park benches. He wanted to see the real world. He wanted to see what people were like when they had nothing to gain from him. The experiment had been a crushing disappointment. He had been ignored, cursed, spat at, and treated like vermin. He had seen the casual cruelty of the comfortable and the desperate selfishness of the struggling. He had started to believe that genuine, selfless kindness was a myth, a fairy tale for children. And then this woman, this angel in a worn-out coat. She hadn't just given him food. She had given him her dignity. The lie she told, "I bought too much food," was an act of profound grace. She was protecting his pride, treating him not as a beggar, but as an equal. He had seen the deep weariness in her eyes, the worry etched into her face. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that she was in trouble. And yet, she had given him her last meal. He finally lifted the fork. The rice was rich, perfectly spiced, the plantains sweet and tender. It was the most incredible meal he had ever eaten in his life. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, and with each mouthful, he felt a wall inside him begin to crumble. He wasn't just eating food. He was consuming an act of pure, unadulterated goodness. And it was healing him. When he was done, He didn't throw the container away. He wiped it clean with the napkin and kept it. He had to find her. This couldn't be the end of the story. The next day, Jide found him in the designated alleyway, looking slightly more human. "Are we done with this social experiment, sir?" Jide asked, his tone impeccably neutral, but his eyes broadcasting his disapproval. "No, Jide," Kaelo said, his voice clearer than it had been in weeks. "We're just beginning. I need you to find someone." He described the woman, her coat, her accent, the park. It was a long shot, but Jide was the best. Within 24 hours, Jide had a name, Adana Okoro. He had her address, her work history, the name of her son, the reason for her firing. He laid it all out for Kaelo in the back of a discreet black SUV parked several blocks away. Kaelo read the file, his anger toward the supervisor, Brenda, a hot, sharp spike. But his focus was on Adana, a widow, a mother, fired on a false accusation, $87.54 in the bank. He felt a fierce, protective urge rise in him. His first instinct was to solve all her problems with a single wire transfer. Anonymous, of course. Set her up for life. But he stopped himself. That felt too easy. It felt like an insult to the gift she had given him. Her kindness wasn't a transaction. He couldn't repay it with money. He had to honor it. He needed to know her, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a person. He cleaned himself up, but only slightly. A shave, a clean set of simple clothes, jeans and a hoodie he had Jide buy from a thrift store. He still looked like a man down on his luck, but a man who was trying. He started spending his days around her neighborhood. He found her a few days later, coming out of the public library, a stack of books on tailoring and small business management in her arms. He accidentally bumped into her, causing her to drop her books. "Oh, I am so sorry," he said, rushing to help her pick them up. She looked at him, and for a second, he saw a flicker of recognition, and then confusion. He looked different from the broken man on the bench. "It is you," she said, her voice soft with surprise. "From the park." Yes," he said, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to thank you. You have no idea what that meal meant to me." He introduced himself as Kay. She told him her name was Adana. He asked about the books. She explained, with a quiet passion, her dream of one day opening her own tailor shop. "I love to make things," she said, a small, hopeful smile gracing her lips. "To take something broken and make it whole again." The words hit Kaelo with the force of a physical blow. That's what she had done for him. Over the next few weeks, Kay became a gentle presence in her and Chike's life. He would meet her in the park after she picked Chike up from school. He'd push Chike on the swings, his deep laughter mingling with the boy's squeals of delight. He never overstepped. He never offered money, knowing it would change everything. Instead, he offered something far more valuable, his time. He listened as she talked about her struggles to find a new job. He looked at the sketches in her worn notebook, marveling at the intricate designs she created. He told her they were beautiful, that she was a true artist. He saw the way she lit up at the praise, and it was more rewarding than closing any multi-million-dollar deal. One afternoon, he brought a small, carefully wrapped gift. It was a second-hand copy of a beautifully illustrated book of Nigerian folktales. "For Chike," he said. Adana's eyes filled with tears. "You did not have to," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. "I wanted to." He was falling in love, not with her beauty, though she was beautiful, Not with her resilience, though she was the strongest person he had ever met. He was falling in love with her soul, the part of her that saw a stranger in the dark and offered him her last meal. He was terrified. This feeling was real, more real than anything he had ever known. But it was all built on a lie. A necessary lie, he told himself, but a lie nonetheless. He had to tell her the truth. But not yet. Not until he was sure. The moment of truth arrived on a chilly Tuesday, exactly 1 month after they met. Adana had finally found a small, part-time job cleaning a local community center. It was barely enough to keep them afloat, but it was something. Kay had told her he had a big job interview the next day, a position as a warehouse manager, he'd said. It was a lie, of course, but it was the final piece of his test. The problem is, he said, looking down at his worn jacket with a hole in the elbow, I don't look the part. Adana didn't hesitate. Bring it to me, she said, and your shirt. I will have them ready for you in the morning. That night, while Chike slept, Adana worked. She meticulously mended the hole in the jacket's elbow, her stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She took a tiny scrap of dark gray silk from her precious collection and used it to reinforce the seam from the inside. A secret detail no one would ever see, but she would know was there. A touch of strength and beauty hidden from the world. She washed his one good shirt by hand in her sink, ironed it until it was crisp, and even polished his scuffed boots with her own small tin of polish. She worked until 2 a.m., her fingers aching, but her heart full. She was helping a friend. She was taking something broken and making it whole. The next evening, he appeared at her door, a single, perfect rose in his hand. I got the job, he announced, a wide, genuine smile on his face. I want to celebrate. I'm taking you and Chike out for the best dinner in the city. Adana was hesitant. Kay, that is too much. We can just... No, he insisted. Please, let me do this. She finally agreed, her heart fluttering. She put on her best dress, a simple blue one she had made herself, and helped Chike into a clean shirt. When they went downstairs, there was no beat-up pickup truck waiting for them, which is what Kay usually borrowed from a friend. Instead, parked at the curb, was a car so black it seemed to drink the light. A Mercedes-Maybach S680. It gleamed under the streetlights like a polished obsidian stone. Adana stopped, confused. Kay, is this our taxi? There must be a mistake. Before he could answer, a man in a sharp, dark suit got out of the driver's side. It was Jide. He walked around and opened the rear passenger door, his face impassive. Good evening, sir, he said to Kay. Ma'am, young sir. Kay simply smiled at Adana's bewildered expression and gestured toward the open door. Our ride is here. She got in, her mind reeling. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet power. It was silent, insulated from the noise of the city. As they pulled away from the curb, Adana looked at the man beside her, the man she knew as Kay, the down-on-his-luck friend, who was now sitting in a car that cost more than her apartment building. Kay, she began, her voice trembling slightly. What is going on? He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his eyes full of an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. The car didn't head toward any restaurant district she knew. It drove downtown, into the heart of the financial district, a forest of glittering skyscrapers. It stopped in front of the tallest one of all, the Adebayo Tower, the building she had been fired from. No, she whispered, a dawning horror and confusion washing over her. Why are we here? The celebration, he said softly. Jide opened the door, and Kay led her through the opulent marble lobby, past security guards who nodded at him with deference. They went to a private elevator. He pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse. The doors opened into a sprawling office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the entire city. On the large mahogany desk, a simple brass plate read, Kaelo Adebayo, CEO, Adebayo Holdings. Adana stared at the name, then back at the man standing beside her. Kaelo. It was him, the man from the park bench, the friend who pushed her son on the swings, the CEO of the company that owned this very building. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening lurch. She felt dizzy. You, she stammered, backing away slightly. You lied to me. I did, he said, and his voice was raw with vulnerability. And I am so sorry for that. But I had to know. He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, clean styrofoam container, the one she had given him. He held it out to her. Do you know what this is, Adana? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. This is the most valuable thing I own. It's worth more than this building, more than my company, more than the $5.3 billion in my bank account. Her mind snagged on the number. $5.3 billion. It was so absurd, so astronomical, it didn't even sound real. She started to laugh, a shaky, disbelieving sound. A billionaire? And you were wearing a jacket with a hole in the elbow? The humor broke the tension for a second, and he smiled, a real, pained smile. The hole was authentic, I assure you. Then his expression grew serious again. Adana, before I met you, I was a broken man. I had been betrayed by someone who I thought loved me, but only loved my money. I thought real kindness, real connection was gone from the world. I was starving, not for food, but for hope. I wasn't looking for a wife or a girlfriend. I was just looking for a reason to believe in people again. He stepped closer to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. And then you who had every reason to be bitter, to be selfish. You who had just lost your job and had almost nothing to your name. You gave me your last meal. And that's when he broke. The carefully controlled facade of the billionaire CEO crumbled, and he was just a man, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down his face, unchecked. He didn't try to hide them. Why? He choked out, the word a raw plea. Why did you do it? Adana looked at this powerful, broken man, and she didn't feel fear or awe. She felt a deep, aching compassion. She reached out and gently wiped a tear from his cheek with her thumb. She gave him the only answer she had, the truth that was the bedrock of her entire being. My mother always taught me, she said softly, her own eyes now filling with tears. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. He let out a sob, a sound of pure, cathartic release, and pulled her into his arms. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling, his face buried in her hair. She held him back, her small frame supporting his weight. In the penthouse office, high above the city that had been so cruel to her, surrounded by a wealth she could barely imagine, Adana Okoro cried. She cried for her lost husband. She cried for her struggles. She cried for the cruelty of women like Brenda. And she cried for this strange, beautiful man who had come into her life disguised as a beggar, only to give her a kingdom. And so we returned to the ballroom, 6 months later, to the shimmering sea of light and wealth. The crash of Brenda's tray of glasses was a punctuation mark at the end of Kaelo's speech. A dozen conversations had stuttered and died. 100 pairs of eyes turned from the stage to the source of the sound. They saw a lowly server, standing amidst a puddle of champagne and a constellation of shattered crystal. They saw her face, pale and stricken. They saw her, and then, just as quickly, they dismissed her. She was no one. The applause for Adana and Kailo swelled again, washing over the moment, erasing it. A security guard and another server moved in swiftly, helping a trembling Brenda clean up the mess and ushering her away, back to the invisibility of the kitchens. On the stage, Adana hadn't missed it. She had seen Brenda's face. She had seen the shock, the envy, the final, pathetic collapse. A year ago, a moment like this might have brought a surge of triumph, a feeling of vindication. But standing here now, bathed in the golden light, Kailo's hand holding hers, she felt only a quiet, profound pity. Brenda's punishment wasn't the dropped tray or the public embarrassment. Her punishment was being Brenda. It was living inside a spirit so small, so starved of generosity, that the only way she could feel big was by making others feel small. Adana had escaped that smallness. She had built a world on the opposite principle. The rest of the evening passed in a glorious blur for Adana. Donors and city officials, celebrities and artists, all lined up to shake her hand, to praise her vision. They saw a poised, elegant woman, the visionary founder of the city's most important new charity. They didn't see the woman who had scrubbed their toilets. They didn't see the mother who had lain awake at night, sick with worry about rent. Or rather, they saw her, but they didn't understand that she was the same person. Kailo stayed by her side, a quiet, solid presence. He was proud of her, but he was also fiercely protective. He deflected the overly effusive, guided her away from the blatantly opportunistic. He was her shield, just as she had been his salvation. Later in the evening, as the gala was winding down, Kailo led her to a quiet, private balcony overlooking the city. The noise of the party faded behind them, replaced by the distant, humming pulse of the metropolis. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, his voice soft. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the silk of his suit cool against her cheek. "I was nervous," she confessed. "I kept thinking they would all see me as the cleaner, the fraud." "I saw you," he said, turning to face her. "I saw the most incredible woman in the world, the same woman I met on a park bench." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Adana's heart did a little flip. "Kailo." "I know we agreed to wait," he said, his voice a little unsteady. "But tonight felt right." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a ring. It wasn't a massive, ostentatious diamond, as the world might expect. It was an elegant, intricately designed gold band, and at its center was not a stone, but a tiny, perfect sculpture of a single grain of rice, fashioned from platinum and surrounded by a halo of small, brilliant-cut diamonds that looked like grains of salt. It was exquisite, unique, and so deeply personal it took her breath away. "I had it made," he explained, "to remember the beginning, to remember what's real." He took the ring out of the box and showed her the inside of the band. Engraved in tiny, perfect script were the words, "The hand that gives." Adana was crying again, but these were not the tears of sorrow or overwhelming shock. These were tears of pure, unadulterated joy, a joy so profound it felt like coming home. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick. "Yes, Kailo. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was a promise, a celebration, and a prayer of thanks, high above the city lights. Down below, in the alley behind the Grand Hotel, Brenda was stuffing her cheap uniform into a tote bag, her face streaked with tears of rage and humiliation. She had been fired on the spot. As she turned to leave, her foot kicked something on the ground. It was a single, perfect, golden fried piece of plantain, likely dropped from a discarded plate from the party. She stared at it for a long moment, then let out a bitter, ugly sob and hurried away into the darkness. The aftermath of that night unfolded with the quiet, inexorable logic of a well-told story. Adana and Kaelo were married 3 months later. It wasn't a lavish society wedding. They flew Adana's mother in from Nigeria, her first time ever on an airplane. The ceremony was held in the small community garden in Adana's old neighborhood, the place where Kaelo, as K, had first pushed Chike on the swings. Adana wore a simple, elegant white gown she had designed and sewn herself. Her mother, resplendent in traditional Nigerian lace, wept openly with pride. Jide, Kaelo's ever-present driver, stood as his best man, looking uncharacteristically emotional and only making one dry comment all day. When Kaelo unveiled his wedding gift to Adana, the deed to the entire apartment building she used to live in, which he had bought and was turning into a non-profit housing cooperative for immigrant families, Jide leaned over and muttered, "A toaster would have been sufficient, sir." The wedding feast was not catered by a Michelin-starred chef. It was a joyous, vibrant affair, with huge platters of jollof rice, fried plantain, pepper soup, and suya cooked by the women from the neighborhood. It was served to everyone, from the gardeners to the handful of Kaelo's billionaire friends who were in attendance, on beautiful, simple ceramic plates. It was a feast that honored where Adana came from, a celebration of community and shared joy. The Chike Foundation, fueled by Kaelo's immense resources and Adana's clear-eyed, compassionate vision, grew exponentially. It wasn't just about feeding people. Adana insisted on a model built on dignity. They opened training centers that taught culinary skills, tailoring, and other trades, creating pathways to employment. The foundation's first major corporate partnership was with a new, ethically run commercial cleaning company that Kaelo had funded, a company that offered its employees a living wage, full benefits, and a stake in the profits. It systematically began winning contracts away from companies like the one Brenda used to work for, changing the industry from the inside out. Adana never forgot her roots. Her main office wasn't in a skyscraper. It was a converted warehouse in a low-income neighborhood, accessible and welcoming. She knew the names of the people who came to her centers. She listened to their stories. She was not a distant philanthropist. She was a neighbor. And Brenda? Her life spiraled downwards. Fired from the catering company. Blacklisted from other high-end service jobs. Due to her spectacular failure at the gala, she drifted from one low-wage job to another. Her flashy apartment became a room in a boarding house, which then became nothing. Her pride, the only currency she had ever valued, was a poor shield against the cold realities of poverty. About a year after the gala, she found herself in a homeless shelter, a place she had once looked upon with utter contempt. She was hungry, broken, and anonymous. One evening, standing in line for the dinner service, she was handed a hot plate of food by a cheerful volunteer. It was jollof rice and fried plantain. As Brenda took the plate, her eyes fell on the volunteer's apron. It bore a simple, elegant logo, a child's hand reaching out to an adult's hand with the words, "The Chike Foundation," underneath. Brenda looked down at the steaming plate of food in her hands, food given freely, with a kind smile and no questions asked. She didn't see Adana. She didn't need to. In the quiet humility of that moment, receiving charity from the empire of kindness built by the woman she had tried to destroy, she finally understood. The justice was not vengeful. It was poetic. It was the quiet, undeniable triumph of a generous heart. Adana never knew about that moment, and she wouldn't have cared. She was too busy building a better world to waste time on the ruins of the old one. True wealth is not what you keep in a vault, but what you give from an empty hand. It is not measured in billions of dollars, or in accolades, or in the height of the skyscraper that bears your name. It is measured in a single plate of rice, given with a full heart to a stranger in the dark. Kaelo Adebayo had searched for something real in a world that felt fake, and he found it in the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to let hardship poison her spirit. Adana Okoro had faced the worst of the world's cruelty, and had answered it not with bitterness, but with a radical act of grace. Their story is not a fairy tale about a poor girl being rescued by a rich prince. It is a story about two people who were both starving in different ways and who fed each other. It is a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe is not money or status, but the simple, profound human connection that happens when one person looks at another in their moment of need and says, "I see you." As Adana's mother knew, and as her grandmother knew before her, the proverb holds true across oceans and generations. The hand that gives is the hand that gathers. It does not gather gold or praise or power. It gathers what matters most: love, dignity, and a world remade in the image of its own kindness. If this story moved your heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because every tale has a lesson, and Alfred's Folktales never forgets.